It was a cold spring morning in 1980 when Mayor Thomas Ellery and his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, vanished from the small town of Red Hollow, Texas, a place where nothing ever really changed. This was the kind of town where doors stayed unlocked. Everyone knew each other by name, and Sunday service at the old wooden church was the heart of the community. That morning started like any other. Mayor Ellery had left his home early to prepare for a town meeting, and little Lily was supposed to walk over to her grandmother's house just a few streets away. But neither of them ever arrived at their destinations. By noon, whispers had turned into full-blown panic. And by sundown, Red Hollow had fallen under a dark cloud of confusion, fear, and grief that would linger for years. The local police launched a search within hours. Roads were blocked off, rivers were dredged. Helicopters combed the surrounding woods, and dozens of volunteers went door to door. But there were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no broken windows, no calls for help. It was as if the two had simply been erased. What baffled investigators even more was that Mayor Ellery's car was still parked neatly in front of Town Hall, untouched. His office was in order. Lily's school bag was found on her bed, untouched. Everything pointed to normal, except the complete disappearance of two beloved members of the town. In the days that followed, the town grieved. Posters with Lily's smile and the mayor's kind eyes covered telephone poles. Candlelight vigils drew hundreds. But weeks turned into months, and months into years, and eventually, Red Hollow had no choice but to move on, though the ache never left. Rumors swirled. Some whispered of foul play, others of the mayor's potential enemies in regional politics, and some clung to the idea that it was simply a tragic accident, a moment of wrong place, wrong time. Still, no bodies were ever found, no ransom notes, no solid leads, just silence. Lily's mother, Marianne Ellery, eventually moved away, unable to bear the empty house. The mayor's office remained unused for almost a year, more out of respect than protocol. And the church, the beating heart of Red Hollow, kept a candle burning every Sunday in honor of the missing pair. It became a symbol of hope and mourning all at once. Generations passed through its wooden doors, always remembering, always wondering. The unanswered questions clung to the pews like dust. Then, 8 years later, almost to the day, something happened that would shake Red Hollow to its very core. The church, now aging and in need of repairs, began a long overdue renovation project. The roof had started to sag, the foundation was cracking, and the basement hadn't been touched in decades. Local volunteers, many of whom had grown up with Lily or worked alongside Mayor Ellery, rolled up their sleeves to restore the sacred space. It started with the removal of the altar floor. Beneath it, workers discovered a hidden layer of stone. That wasn't on any blueprint. The team initially thought it was just part of the original foundation. But when they lifted the stones, what they found made one of the workers stumble back and drop his flashlight. A narrow, man-made tunnel stretched out beneath the church, leading into darkness. The air inside was thick and cold, untouched for years. At first, they thought it was part of a forgotten storm shelter, or perhaps a relic from the Civil War. But the deeper they went, the more it became clear this was something else entirely. Along the walls of the passage, they found old symbols carved into the stone, not religious, not historical, just strange abstract shapes. And then, as the tunnel opened into a small underground chamber, they saw what had remained hidden for nearly a decade. There, in the dim light of a handheld lantern, something was uncovered that forced the entire renovation to come to an immediate stop. A discovery so unsettling, so unexpected. It brought back all the pain and questions from 1980 in a crashing wave. Word of the find spread fast. Within hours, police were on the scene. The area was sealed off, and investigators returned to a case they had long ago filed away as cold. Reporters circled like hawks, townspeople gathered behind barricades, and old faces returned to Red Hollow. For the first time in years, there was a quiet sense among everyone present that something sacred had been violated, and that whatever was hiding in the shadows of that church basement was finally ready to come to light. The chamber held more than just dust and decay. Something had been left behind, something human, something personal. But more than anything, it held answers. Partial, fragmented answers that hinted at a story no one had ever imagined. A story not about random disappearance, but of secrets, betrayal, and the lengths people might go to protect something they feared the world wasn't ready to know. Who built the tunnel? Why did it lead directly under the altar? And what had happened on that quiet spring morning in 1980 that had been buried, literally and figuratively, beneath the church's foundation for so long? As investigators began to piece together what had been hidden in that underground room, the people of Red Hollow were forced to ask themselves a question they never imagined would resurface. Had they ever really known their mayor at all? The answers would begin to unfold in the days ahead. But they wouldn't come without consequence, and not everyone in town was ready to hear them. The town of Red Hollow had always trusted Mayor Ellery. He was the kind of man who stopped to talk to kids on the street, helped fix broken fences without being asked, and stood up during tough council meetings with a calm, steady voice. People voted for him not just because he was smart or organized, but because he genuinely seemed to care. And Lily, his daughter, was like a little beam of sunshine, always laughing, skipping down the sidewalk, asking neighbors about their dogs, or handing out cookies with her mom on weekends. To most, the Ellery family was a picture of simple, small-town goodness. So when they vanished, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a shock to everything people believed was safe and right in the world. But now, 8 years later, with this dark, narrow tunnel hidden beneath the church, everything people thought they knew was starting to feel uncertain. Why would a place as sacred as the church be hiding something this strange? And more importantly, what had really happened back in 1980? Sheriff Dale Morgan, who had been just a young deputy during the original investigation, was now standing at the edge of the tunnel with a look that mixed disbelief and something close to dread. He'd been the one who knocked on the Ellery door the night they went missing. He'd sat with Mary Ann, tried to piece together their last known movements, and held on to hope for years longer than most. Now, with the underground chamber cordoned off by yellow tape and the press lining up along Main Street, Sheriff Morgan felt something deeper than duty. A need to find out the truth, not just for the town, but for himself. Inside the chamber, investigators worked slowly. The space was tight, barely wider than a bedroom, with stone walls and an uneven dirt floor. On the far side was a wooden crate, partially rotted through, covered in what looked like years of dust and debris. Nearby, tucked into a recess in the wall, was a small, rusted metal box. No one opened it right away. Everything was photographed, catalogued. It all felt old, but intentional, as if someone had carefully placed these items here and meant for them to stay hidden. Meanwhile, outside, townsfolk stood in silence, watching the church like it might collapse under the weight of its secrets. Among them was Grace Bennett, who had once been Lily's fourth-grade teacher. She remembered the little girl's drawings, her shy smile, and the way she'd wait after class just to ask if she could erase the chalkboard. Grace hadn't stopped thinking about her in all these years. And now, standing among a crowd of former students and longtime neighbors, she felt something stir deep inside her, a memory she hadn't thought about in decades. It was a conversation. Just weeks before the disappearance, Lily had mentioned something odd. She said her dad had taken her into a secret room after church one Sunday. Lily hadn't seemed scared, just curious. She said it had candles, stone walls, and a funny smell. At the time, Grace thought it was just a child's imagination. maybe a game. But now, the details were coming back too clearly to ignore. She stepped forward and found Sheriff Morgan, telling him quietly what she remembered. His expression didn't change much, but she could tell it mattered. He scribbled a note and walked quickly back toward the church steps, radioing his team inside. Back in the chamber, as experts carefully lifted the metal box from the wall, they found something even stranger. The box was locked, old but sturdy, and engraved faintly on the top was a date: April 6, 1980, the very day the mayor and Lily disappeared. That detail spread fast. Within the hour, theories began flying across Red Hollow. Some believed it was a time capsule the mayor had secretly planned, while others insisted it had to be connected to a larger conspiracy. Maybe blackmail, maybe something political. Mayor Ellery had been in talks with state officials around that time, pushing back on a controversial oil deal that would have brought outside money into Red Hollow, but at the cost of local control. A few people whispered that he had made enemies, powerful ones, and then there were the older residents who spoke of stories even further back, of hidden chambers under the church that dated to the town's founding, of rumors passed down through generations that the land beneath the church wasn't always holy ground. One woman, Mrs. Hartwell, who was nearly 90 and had lived in Red Hollow all her life, recalled her grandfather once mentioning a burial vault that predated the town itself. Things were put there, she said, things that weren't meant to be found. But this wasn't just legend anymore. This was real. Sheriff Morgan requested the state forensics team to join the investigation. In the meantime, local news outlets began to camp outside the church day and night. Some reporters came from as far as Dallas, digging into old town records, reprinting newspaper clippings from 1980, and interviewing anyone who had even a vague connection to the Ellery family. The case, once cold and buried in the past, was now the center of attention again. Only this time, there was a new urgency in the air. Mary Ann Ellery, now living a quiet life in New Mexico, was contacted about the discovery. She declined to speak to most reporters, but she did send a brief message through her attorney. I always knew something was missing in the way things were handled. I just want the truth for Lily. Inside the church, the work continued, late into the night. More items were uncovered: pieces of old fabric, a cracked porcelain doll, and what appeared to be a children's shoe buried near the wall. Each new find deepened the mystery. Why had these things been hidden so carefully? Was it some kind of ritual? A misguided attempt to protect someone, or something far worse? And still, no sign of the mayor. No sign of Lily. The people of Red Hollow were left with more questions than ever. And as the wind blew softly through the tall grass that lined the empty roads outside town, one thing became painfully clear: the truth had been sleeping under their feet for years, and now that it was waking up, it wasn't going back to sleep. The locked metal box sat quietly in the evidence room at the sheriff's office, untouched for hours as experts decided how to handle it. It had become the center of the mystery, not because of what anyone knew was inside, but because of what it might reveal. Sheriff Morgan stared at it through the glass window, the engraved date still haunting him. April 6, 1980. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside would either bring them closer to the truth or unravel something they weren't ready for. For now, they had to wait for the forensics team to arrive with the right tools to open it safely. The old lock, rusted but solid, seemed determined to guard its secrets. Back at the church, volunteers were dismissed for the day, but one man stayed. Behind Nolan Reeves, the town's unofficial historian. He wasn't a detective, but he knew more about Red Hollow than anyone else. Nolan had shelves full of old maps, journals, and family records dating back to the town's founding in the late 1800s. The moment he heard about the hidden tunnel, he pulled out every blueprint he could find, looking for signs that such a passage had ever been documented. It wasn't, but he did find something else, buried in a set of letters. Exchanged between early town elders was a cryptic note about a sealed chamber beneath the church, described only as a necessary precaution to contain that which must not rise. The language was vague, almost dramatic, but it wasn't just a one-off mention. 2 other letters referenced a vault and a burden shared in silence. Nolan didn't know what to make of it yet, but it added weight to the idea that the tunnel had been built for a reason, long forgotten or deliberately kept hidden, while he studied in silence. The rest of the town wrestled with their own versions of the past. Old stories resurfaced. People remembered small things, strange looks from the mayor in his last week's odd conversations Lily had with friends. One woman, Denise Callow, said she remembered seeing Mayor Ellery leaving the church late at night a few times, long after services had ended. At the time, she thought it was just stress or work. But now, it didn't sit right. Some residents began to grow uneasy, not just because of what was being discovered, but because of how quickly the town was being pulled back into something they thought they'd buried. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said the mayor had been involved in something dark. Others believed someone in town had known all along what was under that church. A few even started pointing fingers at families who had held power in Red Hollow for generations, wondering if the secrets ran deeper than anyone imagined. Meanwhile, the subplots surrounding the oil deal from 1980 began to draw more attention. A young journalist from a Houston paper, Ella Monroe, arrived in town digging into Mayor Ellery's final months. She uncovered correspondence between the mayor and a regional energy company that had gone under suspiciously just months after he vanished. The company had been pushing to drill near Red Hollow, and Ellery had firmly opposed it, citing environmental concerns and potential cultural disruption. That part was public. But what wasn't known was that the mayor had also met privately with landowners, urging them not to sell. He was trying to protect something. But what? Ella's discovery added pressure to the sheriff's office. Was the disappearance political? Was it connected to the church, or was it 2 separate issues colliding in one tragic mystery? Sheriff Morgan wasn't ready to say, but when he reviewed the mayor's personal notes from his office, he found one entry from 2 days before he disappeared. It read simply, "Final warning came today. I think they know I've seen it. Must find a way to keep Lily safe." Those words hit like a punch to the gut. They suggested that Ellery wasn't just caught in something, he was aware of it, and he feared for his daughter's life. The question that haunted everyone now was, did he succeed? That night, Grace Bennett found herself unable to sleep. Her thoughts returned to Lily's mention of the secret room. It wasn't just the memory that troubled her, it was what Lily had said afterward. "Daddy says it's older than the town, but we don't tell anyone or they'll get scared." At the time, Grace assumed it was just fantasy. Now she wondered if Lily had seen something no child ever should. At sunrise, the forensics team arrived to open the metal box. Sheriff Morgan stood by, silent and tense. The room was quiet, except for the soft click of tools and the occasional breath held just a second too long. When the box finally gave way, everyone leaned in. Inside, they found papers, old, yellowed, fragile, and beneath them, a worn leather notebook. The first page was signed, Thomas Ellery. The handwriting was rushed, uneven in places. The first entry read, "If you're reading this, it means I failed." They didn't open it further, not yet. The contents were bagged, photographed, and sealed for review. But the weight of what might be inside settled over everyone like fog. Sheriff Morgan looked out the window of the station, watching the morning. Light touched the church steeple across town and felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. Elsewhere, a group of town council members met behind closed doors. Their conversation wasn't about safety or reconstruction. It was about what to do if certain truths came to light. Some feared it would tear the town apart. Others believed Red Hollow had to face whatever had been buried, no matter the cost. But one voice in the room warned, if that notebook says what I think it does, we might all be in danger, not just reputationally, but physically. And in the shadows of the church, long after the workers had left, someone returned to the tunnel. A flashlight flickered in the dark as footsteps echoed down the stone passage. The chamber was empty now, cleared out by the police, but the visitor wasn't looking for evidence. They were looking to see what had been missed. A loose stone near the back wall shifted slightly. The figure knelt, fingers tracing symbols in the dirt. They paused, as if listening, then slipped a folded piece of paper into the crack and turned to leave. Outside, Red Hollow looked the same, but beneath the surface, everything had changed. The notebook lay open under a soft desk lamp in Sheriff Morgan's office. The pages, weathered and smudged, told a story no one had expected. It wasn't just a record of the mayor's last days. It was a confession, a warning, and a cry for help all in one. The entries were hurried, written under pressure. Mayor Ellery had clearly been tracking something long before he vanished. He mentioned names, some familiar, some unfamiliar, and repeated references to something he called the Circle, a group he believed had ties to the land beneath the church. It wasn't clear what they did or why they operated in secrecy. But what was clear was that Ellery believed they were willing to do anything to protect their agenda. The mayor had discovered the tunnel accidentally, or at least that's what he wrote. He had noticed something odd during a foundation check at the church years before and followed the trail until he reached the hidden chamber. What he found disturbed him, though he never said exactly what. His entries became increasingly paranoid. After that, he believed someone had been watching him, following him. He feared for Lily's safety, and in one heartbreaking line he wrote, "If it comes down to it, I'll do what I have to. I won't let her be taken." That line hit hard, Sheriff. Morgan called an emergency meeting with state investigators. They agreed that the notebook changed everything. This wasn't a case of a random disappearance. It pointed to something intentional, coordinated, maybe even a cover-up. But just as they were preparing to make this information public, something else happened that turned the investigation on its head. Ella Monroe, the journalist from Houston, hadn't stopped digging. Her research led her to the old archives in the county records office, hidden in a set of land grants from 1912. She found a map that didn't match the current layout of Red Hollow. It showed a structure beneath the church marked only as V. When she cross-referenced the plot with early ownership records, she found a strange connection. The original land the church was built on had never technically been sold. It was transferred quietly between a handful of names that kept appearing in Ellery's notebook. She rushed to share her findings with Sheriff Morgan. But when she arrived at the station, something stopped her. A car she didn't recognize was parked across the street. A black sedan, engine off, windows tinted. It hadn't moved in hours. She turned and walked a long way around, taking her notes to Nolan Reeves instead. He was stunned by the map. "This isn't just a tunnel," he said slowly. "This is part of something older than the town, maybe older than any of us know." That night, the church was quiet. The renovation project was on hold. But Grace Bennett had trouble sleeping again. Her memories of Lily kept coming back. The little girl's innocent words about the secret room, the way she said it was for the special ones Grace hadn't understood then. But now she wondered if Lily had been taken there not just once, but more than that. She got dressed and walked to the church in the dark, flashlight in hand. The front door creaked open easily. She knew the building too well to feel fear, but something about the air inside felt colder than usual. She made her way to the altar and knelt. brushing her hand across the old wooden boards. There was a gap, one that hadn't been noticed. Before, she pressed lightly, and a hidden hinge creaked open. A second tunnel, smaller, less finished. It had been sealed with dirt, but not entirely blocked. Grace backed away slowly, her heart pounding, and called the sheriff the next morning. The second tunnel was cleared enough to send in a camera drone. The footage revealed a small room, far older than the one they'd already discovered. The walls were stone, but the markings were different. Symbols carved deep into the rock, worn smooth by time. And at the center of the room stood a stone pedestal. On it, something metallic glinted in the light, a locket. When the team retrieved it, they opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny photo of Lily Ellery, and opposite it, a folded paper. On the paper, barely legible, was the phrase, "She is still safe." No one spoke for several moments. Sheriff Morgan stared at the photo, frozen. How could this be? Had Lily been kept alive all this time? Was the note old or new? The implications were massive, but there was no way to know yet. Meanwhile, town council members were growing restless. They hadn't expected the story to go this far. Whispers began among them, a quiet panic. One council member, Harold Finch, disappeared the next day. His home was found abandoned, his phone still on the charger. No note, no sign of struggle, just gone. It stirred something dark in Red Hollow. The town was no longer just curious, it was on edge. And then, just as people began to question what was real and what wasn't, the electricity in the church failed for the first time in years. Power crews said there was no fault in the lines. It just stopped. That night, someone broke into the sheriff's office. Nothing was taken, but the notebook was moved, left open to a page that hadn't been before. A page with the words, "Buried truth can still breathe." Now, everyone involved in the case began to feel watched. Ella noticed the same black sedan outside her motel 3 nights in a row. Grace received an anonymous letter in her mailbox with no return address, only a single phrase, "Stop asking." Sheriff Morgan, exhausted but determined, returned to the church one final time that week. He stood in the old chamber, the air still thick and silent, and placed his hand on the cold stone wall. There was something else here, something they hadn't found. He could feel it, and in that moment, something shifted behind the wall. A faint sound, almost like breath. Sheriff Morgan didn't move. He stood perfectly still, the cold stone wall pressed against his palm, his breath caught in his chest. That sound, soft, faint, like a slow exhale, wasn't his imagination. He stepped back, flashlight shaking slightly in his hand, and scanned the wall again. Dust fell from one of the seams, like something had shifted behind it. The wall itself was ancient, older than the church, built from large, uneven stones mortared with a mixture that looked handmade. He radioed for backup, but didn't wait. He started feeling along the edges, searching for anything loose, anything out of place. Behind him, the chamber felt colder. The flashlight flickered as if the batteries were suddenly dying, though they were brand new. A low thud echoed from deep within the wall. Not loud, but unmistakable. And then silence. But the kind of silence that presses on your ears makes. You feel like something is listening just as closely. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. 2 deputies and a structural consultant were brought in. Together, they located a section of the wall that sounded hollow beneath the stone. It took nearly an hour of careful prying and chiseling before one of the stones finally gave way. What they uncovered wasn't another tunnel. It was a narrow cavity, barely wide enough for a person, stretching downward like a well. Came out was thick and old, carrying the smell of earth and something else metallic. Almost like rust or blood at the bottom. About 12 feet down, they found the remains of a ladder. And next to it, carved into the stone, The same strange symbols that had appeared in the older chamber, but this time they weren't faded or worn. They looked freshly etched. That was impossible. The discovery was immediately classified and sealed off from the press. Even the mayor's notebook didn't hint at a second chamber below. Whatever this was, it was buried intentionally, and maybe recently. Meanwhile, Ella Monroe continued tracing the origin of the land deed. Her search led her to a retired surveyor who had worked in Red Hollow during the 1960s, over coffee in a quiet town outside Austin. He pulled out an old field notebook he hadn't opened in decades. "That land under the church," he said. "Flipping through pages wasn't stable. My team flagged it, told the planning committee, but the build went ahead anyway. They said the location was important, sacred." He paused, tapping a corner of the page. But it wasn't sacred. It was strategic. Ella snapped photos of the pages and called Sheriff Morgan immediately. The surveyor's notes showed something the current town blueprints didn't: a collapsed shaft that had once connected to an even older structure buried deeper beneath the ground. No records of what it was, just a warning: do not excavate. Sealed in 1872. Back in Red Hollow, the sheriff stared at the newly uncovered cavity beneath the wall. He knew they were getting close to something far bigger than just a missing person case. As he walked out of the church to clear his head, he found Grace Bennett waiting on the steps. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She held out a piece of paper with trembling fingers. "I got this morning," she said. It was a photo. A blurry black and white picture of a young girl peeking out from what looked like an underground room. Her hair was long, face older, but unmistakable. Lily Ellery. The back of the photo had a date written in faded ink. September 1985. 3 years after she vanished. Sheriff Morgan felt the breath leave his body. The photo was real-land, it looked very relit, meant Lily had survived for at least 5 years after that day in 1980. That changed everything. It meant someone had kept her hidden. Someone had lied. And it meant someone in Red Hollow knew more than they ever admitted. As he stood there, stunned, a deputy rushed out of the building with urgent news. The forensics team reviewing Harold Finch's abandoned home had found something strange: a set of coded messages carved into the underside of his kitchen table. Messages that matched the symbols in the chamber. It was as if Finch had been trying to warn someone, maybe confess. The last symbol was different from the rest, though. It was a circle with a cross through it. Nolan Reeves recognized it immediately when shown the photo. "That's not just a symbol," he said. "It's a mark from one of the oldest societies connected to the church's land." "I thought it was just folklore." The Order of the Veil. Supposedly, they believed in guarding ancient truths no matter what it cost. Suddenly, everything fit together differently. Mayor Ellery's final notes. The sealed shaft from 1872. The sudden opposition to the oil deal. If the order still existed in some form, they weren't just guarding land. They were hiding something within it. Something worth silencing people over. Maybe the mayor found it. Maybe he tried to expose it. And maybe he paid the price. The sheriff gathered his team and prepared for another descent, this time down the newly discovered shaft. But before they could begin, the power went out across the church again. Every light inside and out flickered and then died. The emergency generator kicked in, but only for a moment. Then total darkness. In the silence, a voice came over the sheriff's radio, broken, low, barely audible. "They're listening." The message repeated once. Then the channel went dead. Sheriff Morgan stood in the darkness, gripping his radio tightly as the static fizzled out. The silence that followed felt alive, like the whole building was holding its breath. Flashlights flicked on one by one. The team gathered at the edge of the shaft beneath the chamber wall. the cold air rising from the pit sending chills across everyone's skin. The faint hum of backup power returned, but the church lights didn't. Whatever had caused the outage wasn't a mechanical failure, it was something else. They lowered a drone down the shaft first, its camera cutting through the shadows. The feed showed narrow walls, descending almost 30 feet before opening into a wide underground room. This space was different, cleaner, preserved. There were wooden support beams, rusted chains on the wall, and, in the center, a large iron door set into the stone floor. As the drone hovered closer, letters carved into the iron came into view. It read, Sanctum Occultus. Latin. Sheriff Morgan didn't need a translator. He felt the weight of the words the hidden sanctuary. He and 2 deputies descended the shaft slowly. The air was tight, filled with the smell of cold earth and something older. They reached the bottom and stepped into the underground chamber. It was silent except for the sound of their boots echoing off the stone. The iron door at the center had no handle, but in the corner of the room sat an old wooden chest, locked with a symbol matching the one Harold Finch had carved into his kitchen table. Morgan called for bolt cutters. They snapped the rusted lock easily. Inside the chest was a bundle of documents along with a small black recorder tape still inside. They played it right there, the audio crackling to life. Mayor Ellery's voice came through, shaking, hurried. If you found this, it means I couldn't stop them. I thought I could bargain, reason with them, but it was never about oil, was never about the land. It's about what's buried here, what they've sworn to protect since before this town was even built. His voice broke. They told me Lily would be safe. They said she'd be cared for, raised in the old ways, prepared for her purpose. But I saw the truth too late. I tried to get her out. We almost made it, but they were already inside our house. The tape cut out. Sheriff Morgan gritted his teeth and stepped toward the iron door. With enough force, the old bolts gave way. The door groaned open, and a cold wind hit their faces. What they saw inside was unlike anything they expected. The room below wasn't empty. Candles, still waxed from recent burns, lined the space. Symbols covered the floor, chalk white, not ancient, but fresh. In the far corner, huddled beneath a thick wool blanket, was a woman. Pale, thin, with tangled hair and hollow eyes. She turned slowly as the light landed on her. It was Lily, 8 years older than her last known photo, but undeniably her. The room froze in silence. One of the deputies whispered, "My God." Lily didn't speak right away. She looked at the sheriff, recognition flickering in her tired eyes. "You came too late," she said softly. "He tried to save me." Above ground, paramedics were called. Lily was brought to the hospital, and the news swept across Red Hollow like a firestorm. The missing girl found alive after all these years, hidden beneath the very place they prayed for her. The town erupted. With questions, how had no one seen? How had the church become the center of such a long-held secret? Sheriff Morgan spent the next 48 hours reviewing every document recovered. The truth unraveled like a thread. The Order of the Veil had been real. Founded by a group of early settlers, their mission had evolved into something else entirely. A hidden society sworn to protect the sanctum beneath the church. They believed it was a sacred place where chosen children were to be brought, prepared for something never clearly explained. Lily had been seen as one of those chosen. The mayor found out too late. His attempts to save her were stopped by members of the order, including people still walking the streets of Red Hollow. The original members were gone, but their successors had kept the tradition alive in shadows. Ella Munro's reporting blew. The story wide open. State officials were called. Arrests were made. Among them, several current and former council members. Hidden records, falsified blueprints, secret transfers of land, all of it was exposed. It shook the town's foundations. To the core, families divided. Friends turned. But justice, at last, had begun to take form. Lily slowly recovered in a safe house outside town, her identity protected. In quiet interviews, she recalled moments, fragments of her years below the kindness of the one woman who had brought her food, the story she was told about her purpose, and the one time her father almost got her out. But she never saw him again. His body was never found, only a piece of fabric from his coat buried in the tunnel wall. Red Hollow mourned him like a fallen guardian. Weeks later, Sheriff Morgan stood alone in the empty chamber where Lily had been found. Cleanup crews had cleared out most of it, but the iron door still remained. He stared at the floor, where the symbols had once glowed under flashlight. And then, from behind the wall, just as he turned to leave, a sound came. A click. Then a slow grinding of stone against stone. A second door, hidden behind the first. He froze. A cold draft pushed through the gap. Inside the newly revealed space, barely lit by the flickering flashlight, sat a table. On it rows of framed photographs, not just of Lily, but of others. Children, dozens of them, each labeled with a year. And the most recent one. Sheriff Morgan stood frozen in the chamber, the beam of his flashlight locked on the table, covered in photographs. The dim light flickered across each frame, revealing row after row of children's faces, some faded with time, others recent, painfully clear. At the end of the row was the newest photo, marked with the year 2023, showing a young boy no one in Red Hollow had ever seen before. It was in that moment the weight of the truth fully settled in. What had happened to Lily wasn't a one-time tragedy. It was part of something larger, systemic, buried under tradition and secrecy for more than a century. The Order of the Veil hadn't disappeared, it had simply gone deeper underground, hiding behind good intentions and community trust. The second room was documented carefully, sealed by state investigators who were called in within the hour. It was the final piece needed to understand the full scope of what had happened beneath the church. Dozens of names matched old missing persons cases from all over the region. Some children were never linked to Red Hollow at all. It was as if the town had become a hub, a central location where something had been orchestrated in silence for decades. But now it was no longer hidden. Back above ground, the town was changing. The church was permanently closed and marked as a crime scene. Restoration plans were canceled. Local leaders stepped down, either in shame or under pressure from the community. Public trials followed months later. Ella Monroe's reporting helped bring national attention, leading to new legislation and stricter investigations into similar unsolved cases in rural towns across the country. People began to speak out, witnesses who had once been too afraid. Survivors who had escaped but never been believed. Lily Ellery's story gave them a voice. Lily herself was placed in protective care, far from Red Hollow. She was older now, quieter, but steady. In time, she gave a full testimony, helping investigators identify key members of the order and confirming the role they played in her disappearance. Her story became the backbone of the case that eventually dismantled what remained of the secret society. And though her life could never return to what it had been, she found moments of peace in knowing she had helped bring the truth to light. Grace Bennett retired from teaching and spent her final years writing a memoir about Red Hollow's hidden history, not just the crimes, but the spirit of the people who had refused to look away when the truth came out. Her words helped others heal. Her memory of Lily and the courage to come forward had been the first thread to unravel the whole story. Nolan Reeves, too, devoted his efforts to preserving documents and maps, turning his knowledge into a public archive. What was once hidden in the back of dusty bookshelves became a tool to stop history from repeating. Sheriff Morgan stayed in his role long enough to see the final arrests made. But eventually, he stepped away. The weight of it, all the years of not knowing. The secrets buried beneath the very place people turned to for hope had worn him down. He moved to a quiet cabin outside of town, not out of fear, but to reflect. He kept one item from the case with him, the mayor's leather notebook. Not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder. Mayor Ellery had given everything to protect his daughter, and though it had taken years, his truth had not been lost. Morgan read from it often, especially the final lines. If we can't stop it, let someone else follow the trail. Let them remember what we did. As time passed, Red Hollow began to rebuild, not with new buildings or slogans, but with honesty. People no longer looked away from the past. They taught it in schools. They spoke of it at town meetings. To reopen old wounds, but to make sure the town never forgot what silence had cost them. The name Lily Ellery became a symbol not of tragedy, but of survival. A foundation was started in her name, helping to search for other missing children and supporting families who never got answers. Every year on April 6th, candles were lit around the old town square, not in mourning, but in commitment. The story that had once shaken Red Hollow to its core now helped others find hope, and yet, one question remained unanswered. No one ever found Mayor Thomas Ellery's body. A search of the tunnels and the surrounding land turned up pieces of fabric from his coat. Traces of blood, but nothing definitive. Some believed he had been buried deep within the second shaft, somewhere unreachable. Others thought he had escaped and died elsewhere, too far for anyone to find. But Grace, Nolan, and even Morgan shared a different belief quietly between them, that he had stayed behind to make sure Lily had a chance. That in his final moments, he had held off whatever forces stood in the way of her freedom. He had kept his promise in the years that followed. People stopped using the phrase, the town where the mayor and his daughter vanished. Instead, they said, the town that remembered. Red Hollow no longer denied its darkness it faced. It learned from it and used it to shine a light forward. And though the photographs from the second chamber haunted many, they also served as proof that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. So, in the end, the story of Red Hollow became more than just a mystery solved or a case closed. It became a lesson in perseverance, in listening to the silences between what people say and what's really happening. It reminded people that even the most trusted places can hold secrets and that uncovering them sometimes takes time, courage, and a willingness to believe the unbelievable. And while Lily Ellery now lived far from the town that had once forgotten her, she was never truly alone. Because every time someone lit a candle, spoke her name, or listened a little more closely when a child said something strange, her story lived on, not as a warning, but as a reason to never stop asking questions. And that, perhaps, was the most important truth of all.